Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the Genesis Blog podcast. Today, we're analyzing our next Web3 protocol. Today, we have Ocean Protocol that Siddharth has, gone ahead and taken the lead in researching, and now he's going to present it to all of us. Post which, then Yash and I will come in with questions to further understand and just brainstorm on what this protocol is doing, what it's trying to achieve, and where it can go in the future, and its position, and its place and its value add in the crypto ecosystem. So with that, Siddharth, over to you. Let's begin.
Cheers, Sid. Thanks for that. Hey everyone. So today we're going to go through Ocean Protocol, which is a decentralized data exchange. And what it does is that it aims to bring together data providers, consumers, and service providers into a data marketplace. So what exactly is Ocean Protocol and what does it do, right? So Ocean Protocol allows, let's say that you're a provider of data. Let's say you have a data set. So let's say Sid has a data set and Yash wants to use that data set, let's say, to build out his AI algorithm to essentially refine the algorithm and for machine learning purposes, right? Depends on the type of data set, but Sid has a data set and Yash wants it. What Ocean Protocol does is that it allows Yash and Sid to meet up in a marketplace and allows one of them to sell their data and the other one to consume the data. What it also does is in the middle, it provides tools for service providers, developers to build value-added services and other marketplaces on top of the data assets that are created on the protocol. So in terms of the Web3 value stack, like we discussed, in how to analyze a Web3 protocol, the first investment template podcast that we did, Ocean Protocol can both be seen as an infrastructure play and as an exchange, because it essentially provides the infrastructure for the creation and consumption of data assets, while it also is an exchange in terms of actually being a decentralized exchange geared towards data, right? So before we go into exactly how Ocean Protocol works, some key facts are that it's built on Ethereum and any EVM compatible network. And as we know, many layer one blockchains are EVM compatible. Such as Polkadot, so Polkadot got Moonbeam, Binance Smart Chain, Near Protocols got Aurora, Cosmos has Evmos, Phantom Opera and Avalanche, they're all EVM compatible chains. So that shows you that Ocean Protocol today is able to be deployed on some of the largest L1s out there. That means that its total addressable market is pretty high. And in the future, it's planning on being multi-chain. So that means that its total addressable market could be even higher in the future. So that's a pretty positive sign if you're confident that the future is going to be multi-chain, and I think that I at least am. So it's a positive development for me. And to date, Ocean's raised about $30.83 million over its seed, pre-launch, network launch, and initial exchange offering. It's got some pretty reputable VCs backing it, such as Digital Currency Group. So that's the one behind the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, GBTC. Some people like Fabric Ventures, Synapse Capital, Merkle Tree Capital, quite a lot of different VCs that are supporting Ocean Protocol. And the level of funding that it's raised is about medium to high. I mean, considering that the protocol launched in Q1 2019, that was when the network launch occurred. It means that it's raised a decent amount of money, and it's with the VCs backing it, that provides some level of comfort. Although obviously that's not a silver bullet like we've mentioned in the past. I mean, a reputable VC backing you takes you only as far as you trust the reputation of the VC, right? And that can collapse pretty quickly, like 3 Arrows Capital. So those are some important points about Ocean Protocol, and the essentially the backing behind it, and and like where it's going to be built. Now let's get into the meat of it, right? So how does Ocean Protocol actually work? So I'm just going to pull up a diagram or a flow chart that I created to try and explain this a little better. And we'll be sharing this in the newsletter article that we do as well. But essentially, what Ocean Protocol has is it has two main types of tokens. So it has a data NFT. So a data NFT is a non-fungible ERC-721 token, which represents copyright and ownership of that data set. And a data token is a fungible ERC-20 token that grants data consumers access to that data. So like for example, let's say that Sid owns the data set, right? He can then upload this data set onto Ocean Protocol, and they're very flexible in the types of data that they allow for, which we'll touch upon in a bit. But he uploads this data onto Ocean Protocol, and a data NFT is minted that shows that he is the owner of that data. So he is the only one that has access to that data. So I can't see it, Yash can't see it, no one can see it, but Sid has access to a data NFT that proves ownership of his data. Now, with that with that data NFT, there are data tokens also minted. The way in which these data tokens are minted has changed in the last few months, but data tokens are minted that allow data consumers to access that data service. So essentially, let's say that Yash wants to access Sid's data set, right? Yash will have to pay Sid in Ocean tokens to obtain access to that data token. Now, once he has that data token, he can redeem it for access to that data for any time, any specified amount of time that Sid is specified, right? So the access controls are pretty are fine-grained essentially. So you can configure how long the access for Yash actually lasts for. So one data token for a data service grants access to that service. So what Ocean actually does here, as you can see in the diagram, is that it does two things. It creates the data assets, and it facilitates the consumption of those data assets. And in the middle, it provides the tools for anyone to build ERC-20 based applications on top of that data. So like you can see in this here, right? Like for example, there are a number of different entities that are building tools and services on top of these data assets. So where these data assets can be used differently, right? They can be used in a variety of different ways. So this Felt token, for example, is one that won a grant from Ocean DAO. And we'll get into, again, the details of what Ocean DAO is later in its grants program. But essentially, it won a grant from Ocean DAO to create this Felt token service on top of those data assets that are created by Ocean Protocol. So it's creating a solution for federated learning, and data providers are being anonymized. Or Athena Equity it's a data brokerage that's essentially trying to build a data verification layer for ESG, and is using these data sets that are on Ocean Protocol in order to be able to do this, right? And like for example, let's say that I am a data consumer and I go on to Athena Equities DApp, and I say, oh, I want to verify this ESG data. How, or I want ESG data that is actually verified. I want to know, which of this data is, for some purposes, right? And I can go on to Athena Equity, and they provide me that service that is built on top of the data assets provided by Ocean Protocol in order to be able to verify that ESG data, right? So these value-added services, they provide for they essentially allow the Ocean Protocol ecosystem to branch out, and essentially provide many different types of services for different types of consumers. So yeah, like for example, again, the last one would be just this EMR chain, which is an application that's built towards allowing patients control of their health data. So like let's say I am a patient and I go onto this EMR chain, and I can then upload my data assets that I've created on that I've created on Ocean Protocol to EMR chain, and essentially be able to be able to choose when that data is being accessed and by whom. Right. So essentially, these value-added services just provide a lot of depth to the Ocean ecosystem. So essentially, Ocean offers a lot of flexibility for data publishers and consumers. It supports both static and dynamic data. So static data such as Web2 cloud services like AWS, or Web3 services like Filecoin or Arweave. And for dynamic data, it's streaming APIs from Web2 streaming APIs, or public data oracles like Chainlink, private data oracles like Deco. So as you can see, it supports a variety of different types of data. I'm just gonna stop sharing this now. But yeah, it supports a bunch of different types of data, right? It also allows for the sharing of private data through its computer data service, which is actually very useful. Because let's say that I'm building an AI algorithm that depends on data sets that are usually privately held and contain confidential data. Now, someone who owns that type of confidential data usually wouldn't want to give it out. But in this case, Ocean Protocol's computer data service allows that private data to be hosted on premise of the data within the data publisher's premises. Essentially, it means that as an AI let's say that I'm building an algorithm. I can access that data and run compute jobs on it, which essentially means that I can get the results from the data without having to see what the data actually is. And without the data publisher having to actually reveal the confidential information that's there. So my algorithm can access that data, get trained from it, without having to actually see that data set in person, right? And that's a pretty useful capability to have, considering the vast amount of private and confidential data that is there, and the benefit that it would have for AI algorithms to be able to access that data and learn from it. So that's quite a lot of flexibility for both data publishers and consumers. Thirdly, Ocean also allows publishers freedom in choosing where to host their data. So they can hold their data set in Web2 cloud services like Google Drive or AWS or Dropbox or something. They can store it locally on their phones or servers. Or they can have, instead of having a publicly hosted file that can be accessed by data consumers, they can have the computer data service like I just mentioned. And lastly, one of the most important aspects of and the reason why they have data tokens rather than allowing for the data sets to be paid for in Ocean is because of the fine-grained access permissions or access controls that they provide for this for the service data services that they provide. So the level of access to a particular data set is completely configurable, and you can essentially code each data token for each data set to represent those different levels of access. So that the access can be perpetual. So, a data token can maybe indefinitely access the data service. It can be time bound. So you can access it only for an hour, a day, like within a specific time period, and or it can be one time. So after the service is accessed, the token is burned. And it also allows data publishers to create allow or deny lists. So you can only access the service. Let's say if you're on an allow list and you have that data token, or even if you have a data token, but if you're on the publisher's deny list for maybe being a malicious actor in the past, then you can't access that data token. That data service. Right. So these fine-grained access controls are primarily the reason why there are data tokens for each data set or data service provided. But I'll just stop here for a couple of minutes, just so that, because I've gone over quite a lot of difficult information, and see if you guys have any questions about how Ocean Protocol actually works.
So I think we should just break it down with like a very simple example. So I think something that everyone will be able to resonate with is maybe the healthcare data example. So
Mm-hmm.
can you just like walk up? So like let's say I'm a patient and I have lots of healthcare data about myself, my whole history, my medical history, and I want to somehow monetize it. So what do I do? Like step by step, how do I go from having this data to having it uploaded
Okay.
to this blockchain?
Yeah. So I have, so let's say I have this data, this healthcare data that I want to monetize. I've stored it in my Google Drive, maybe, right? Or
Yeah.
let's say, yeah, I've stored it in my Google Drive. I go on to Ocean Protocol and I submit that data set. And then a data NFT is created that represents my ownership of that data. So it says, okay, this data
Okay.
set, this data NFT was minted for this data set, held in
Okay.
this Google Drive folder by, by Sid. And then I'll go, the process has changed slightly around the way the data tokens have been are issued, and I'll go into that later on. But just consider that, okay, now I have this data NFT, and I also get a million data tokens, right? So I am the data publisher. I have a million data tokens, and these data tokens grant people who want access to my data, they grant them access to it. So let's say that Yash, you want access to this data, and you go onto Ocean Protocol, onto Ocean Market, right? You list, you connect to it using your wallet, and you have Ocean tokens in your wallet. Now I'll go into and the next thing after we do the questions, I'll go into how the pricing models work. But essentially there are two types of pricing models. There's fixed pricing and there's an automated market maker model, right? So let's just for simplicity assume that it's a fixed price for now. We'll go into the details of the AMM in a second. So let's say that you go onto this Ocean market and you see the price of this data set. So let's say that it's like 20 Ocean, right? And you then just you click on that, you send me the Ocean to my wallet, right? By just like clicking purchase, and then you obtain that data token. So in return for your Ocean, I give you one data token. Now you use that data token on Ocean Protocol to be able to access that service, to be able to access that data set. So that data token just serves as proof that you are able. It's a bearer instrument that allows you to access that data, right? So like depending on the access control, so let's say that it's indefinite access, right? So it's indefinite access. So you just hold that data token and you can access my data, my healthcare data indefinitely. So you can use that data to train your AI algorithm. So now you have access to that data indefinitely, right? And yeah, like that's essentially how that would work. But have I explained that correctly, or is there any other detail that
Okay,
you want
let
me to
me
cover?
just try to explain it and you tell me if I'm right or not.
Yeah.
So basically, I'm a data provider. So I'm going to provide my healthcare data. It's in my Google Drive.
Mm-hmm.
So I go to Ocean Protocol and I create a data NFT that links to the data in my Google Drive, right? And this Google Drive data can be, like you said, stored in multiple places. It could be on AWS, it could be on Web3 storage like Arweave, even Filecoin.
Yeah,
But the
yeah,
NFT just links to this data no matter where
yeah,
it's stored. You can
yeah,
choose where
yeah,
you store it. And then you get to create some data tokens of your data NFT, right? And then if anyone wants to access your data, they basically exchange Ocean tokens for your data tokens,
yeah,
and the data tokens give access to the data set.
yeah.
Got it. Yeah. Okay.
That was much better. Yeah.
Yeah.
You explained. Yeah, that was much simpler than mine. Yeah. Just
Okay.
get too lost in detail, but yeah, exactly. That's how it works.
Cool.
Cool. Any other questions, Sid? Anything?
Yeah, if you can just elaborate on, how Ocean is being used as a base layer to build, value-added services essentially. Can you just elaborate on how exactly that looks? Because I know we went through a couple examples, but where I'm getting stuck is the dApps that build on Ocean. They would, in my mind, get access to the same data, the same raw data as any data consumer would, who would go to the Ocean
Yeah.
marketplace directly. So
Yeah.
does the dApp value add, is that limited to say a UI UX improvement, or say an aggregation of certain relevant data? So one, like a large cohort of customers would just go to that other dApp as opposed to coming to the marketplace, or is there something else that these dApps do?
So I think that it's the latter. And And essentially, right, so they get access to the same raw data, but it's not about the data services is consuming that data. It's about providing an easier way for data consumers to actually access specific types of data, is what I understand from how the data services operate, right? So in terms of this Athena equity, right, like the one that I described first, it's a data brokerage that's aiming to drive inflows of data and data sets to the Ocean platform, right? And build a data verification layer for ESG. Now that sounds super complicated, but what it essentially does is that it incentivizes people who have specific types of data to list their data on Ocean Marketplace, and then they through Athena equity they can have a front end, a clean front end to be able to access and filter through data sets of that particular type. Now if you now just like zoom out and think about the different types of data sets that can exist, right? There can be millions, there can be billions of different types of data sets that exist, and trying to filter through that and search through that is it's a thankless and impossible task, right? So these value added services, they essentially allow you to create shop windows. You can create shop windows that all have different types of data sets that are curated for different types of use cases. That's in a nutshell how I would put it.
Got it. Got it. Which is fair. I mean, UI UX I mean, as we were talking offline as well, is a big hindrance. And like you mentioned, millions of data sets would be quite a hassle. And just secondly, what I wanted to touch upon was the initial plan of going multi-chain. So, I mean, the classic drawback of that is siloing the liquidity. And of course, you can say cross-chain bridges and whatnot in the future. But is there any other angle to it on how they plan to for the siloing of the liquidity?
So I think that like at this point and this is a general broader point about blockchains as well, and about these layer one platforms, but at some point to actually be able to use by consumers, we're going to have to stop thinking about, oh, this is built on Solana, or this is built on Phantom, or this is built on this blockchain. Like that doesn't matter to anyone, right? Like in Web2, you don't see, oh, Gmail built on AWS cloud, or like like Google Cloud, right? Like no one cares about what service it's actually built on. So the reasons for building on different blockchains might be, they might be varied in terms of like the technical architecture, but essentially in the future, you're going to have to make sure that there's no fragmentation of liquidity across these blockchains. So that's firstly the case. Secondly, actually, I don't think the liquidity will be really fragmented because the thing is that each data token is meant to have its own liquidity, right? So you're supposed to have liquidity for each data set. Now I'm going to go into this a little bit later during the tokenomics aspect of this, and actually like right when I'm explaining the AMM thing, but that actually doesn't make sense to me right now as well. For each data token to have its own liquidity, I think it's a bit of a flaw, because you need to have deep liquidity for each data asset, and that's not really going to be possible from consumers. And also the entire idea of consumer staking to to signal the quality of a data set, when you're doing that at scale, people don't actually do that. Like it's not going to be that as straightforward as it sounds. So currently, I think even today the model of providing liquidity for each data set is a bit flawed, because that does fragment it. Firstly, it fragments liquidity, and secondly, it's more difficult to, I think it's a little more difficult to value that data, because it's not very easy for stakers to actually understand which data set is the most valuable. You're not going to have a billion people who are able to do this at scale. So I think that's a bit of a flaw. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that in the future, if they go multi-chain and they solve this, data set liquidity problem, this individual data set liquidity problem, if they go multi-chain, then at that point, there's no way that all of these chains should not be interoperable and invisible to the customer. And if they aren't, then that is a significant flaw, right? Like you're fragmenting liquidity, you're just confusing customers, and it's not going to work out in driving traction to your platform.
Yep. Understood.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. So I'll just go. So been teasing the AMM aspect of this for a little bit. So I'll just go into it into it now. So yeah, Ocean uses two methods of pricing data. So it's fixed pricing and automated market makers. So fixed pricing is pretty straightforward, right? So data publishers set a price in Ocean for their data set, and consumers buy access to that data set using Ocean, and they receive data tokens in return, right? And that's the model that we explained earlier on as well. Now the AMM model is pretty interesting. So Ocean Market uses Balancer as the inspiration for its AMM model. So each data asset, right? Each data service that's provided contains a data token paired with a base asset like Ocean, ETH, or DAI. Now it's interesting that they've put in ETH and DAI. Those aren't the defaults. Ocean is the default, and that in terms of aiming to drive usage of Ocean, that makes sense. It's meant to drive usage and usage of and demand for the Ocean token. They chose Balancer as the AMM model for two reasons. Balancer firstly enables the addition of liquidity only through a single token. So most AMMs don't actually allow that. So when the data set is published, right? And this used to be the case. Now it's actually not. Now they've actually changed the process a little bit. But when the data set was initially published in V3 of the protocol, let's say, the data publisher got access to all the data tokens, and therefore they were the only source of liquidity on that platform, right? So because usually when you're providing liquidity in an AMM, you need to have 50% of a base asset and 50% of the asset that you're providing liquidity for. Now, if only the data publisher has the data tokens, then how is a liquidity provider going to get access to those data tokens? So what Balancer allows for is that the publisher holds all of the data tokens, but the liquidity provider can only provide the base token. So they can only provide Ocean, they can only provide ETH, or they can only provide DAI. And that allows them to earn, fees in Ocean, like network rewards in Ocean, for, essentially providing liquidity to that data set, right? The entire point of this is to be able to bootstrap liquidity quickly for, a long tail asset, and a specific one data asset is definitely a long tail asset, right? What Balancer also does is that it allows for non-equal weights in a pool. So usually, like, you have 50% of token A and 50% of token B, but what Balancer allows for is 90% weight towards the data token and 10% weight towards Ocean, right? So that means that in that pool, if you have 90% data tokens, you need only 10% Ocean to be able to create an initial data token price, and that allows you to bootstrap liquidity to your token faster, because you don't need a higher upfront capital requirement, right? You don't need to put 50% Ocean for 50% of the data token. You can actually, only need to provide 1/5 of the initial Ocean liquidity for the initial data token price. Now I know that this is a bit confusing, and I honestly, it's a bit difficult for me to understand as well. But in a nutshell, what it does is that Ocean liquidity providers don't need to provide as much liquidity initially to set the initial data token price. That is at the base layer of like how to understand this. I think that understanding exactly how the weights counterbalance the necessity for providing too much liquidity, that's part of the Balancer model. I haven't gone fully into detail around how that works mathematically, but essentially that's a feature of the Balancer pools that Ocean wanted to import. I'm going to stop here actually, just because I know that you guys might have a question or two about that, and then I'll continue on, because this is a pretty complicated concept.
Okay, so I guess I'll go first. So in the fixed price model, which is what we had discussed earlier, you have your data, you create the data NFT, and from that data NFT, you create and get to decide how many data tokens you want. And then you can, in the fixed price model, a data consumer can pay you in Ocean or ETH or DAI. Is that how it works? You can pay in all three for your data, and you get to set the price.
Yeah.
In the AMM model, you instead of it being a fixed rate, you put it into a liquidity pool, right? So there will be a liquidity pool, and that'll have your data tokens, and it'll have, if I'm getting it correct, it'll have Ocean, ETH, and DAI, or a
Or
combination
die.
of the three. Oh, so
Ocean, ETH, or die.
it'll just have the tokens and one of the three.
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll have, your data tokens paired with either Ocean or ETH or DAI in a liquidity pool, and the ratio of that can be whatever you want it to be, because it's built on balancer where you can, it doesn't have to be in a 50-50 ratio.
Yeah.
And then according to your ratio and the liquidity of both the tokens, the price is set for that particular liquidity pool.
Yeah. That's
And
essentially how it works.
then anyone who's a data consumer can use that liquidity pool to get access to the data,
Yeah.
right? So it becomes like a DEX, and I can just go and swap the same way I could in the fixed price
Exactly.
model, but from a liquidity pool instead of directly from
Exactly.
the provider.
Because
Okay.
it allows for more organic price discovery, right? Like an AMM model
Yeah.
compared to like a fixed price model, it allows for more organic price discovery.
Yeah.
Theoretically at least.
The only thing I don't get is, by bringing in ETH and DAI into the equation, firstly, it seems like they're fragmenting the liquidity, and secondly, it makes the Ocean token seem kind of irrelevant, because if you don't need the Ocean token to get access to the data tokens, then what's the point, right? Like,
Yeah. So
why is it there? Other than just
yeah.
rewards for providing liquidity.
No, I completely agree, honestly. Like the value proposition throughout this entire exercise where I've researched Ocean Protocol and gone into depth, I think that's one of the most glaring, it's one of the most glaring problems. I don't actually see a need for the Ocean token in order to be able to pay for these data assets. Like
Yeah.
I think that what Ocean Protocol actually needs to do in order to be able to increase their usage is make it simpler. They need to do what everyone in
Yeah.
Web3 doesn't do, which is just bear it down, take it down to its essentials, right? Why do you need the Ocean token? If you're coming out at the end of the day and going like, oh, you don't actually need the Ocean token to be able to do these things, and you can do it in a stable coin that just allows for easier understanding by customers, firstly, by data consumers, and it also allows for easier pricing of the data. Intuitively, it's much better to know, this data set costs, 0.23 DAI rather than 0.23 Ocean, because you have no idea how much Ocean costs and firstly, you're going to have to do the initial transaction of exchanging your ETH or your Ocean or whatever, so your ETH or your DAI or whatever for Ocean, which is already a step that introduces friction into the equation, right? So
Yeah.
I think that fundamentally I agree. I don't really see a need for the Ocean token to be able to transact in this model.
I think if you could drive value to the Ocean token by making it the only token you can use to access the data tokens, right? Because then there is some incentive for data consumers to actually go and buy and hold the Ocean token, because then you can use that token to access the data sets that
But
have been built on this platform.
then again, this is the
Yeah.
problem with Web3, where everyone goes like everyone needs to use my own token, and then you
Yeah.
just create complexity and friction for customers. I mean,
Yeah.
why can't you just? But
Absolutely.
like even regardless of that, right? Like they wanna like what is their end goal? They want to create a data marketplace for data assets, not drive up the value of Ocean token. The end goal is to actually allow data to become a liquid asset, right? So if the end goal is that, then why don't you do the things that's the simplest for that, which is essentially create a system in which you're using stable coins to be able to pay for these things, because it's much easier to obtain stable coins. If I was able
But
to
then
pay for
the
this in USDC,
question is, then how do the team and the investors make money? I mean,
I mean,
they are all going to
you
be
can still make
allocated
money in
Ocean tokens,
stables.
right?
You can still make money in stables from transaction fees, right? Because like you have
I
transaction
guess.
fees in that dex, or you have transaction fees from like the fixed price model, in which you're still getting a cut of the, every time that data is transacted or something like that. That's very monetizable. It's not
Yeah.
like just because it's in the Ocean token, that's the only way to monetize something. You're going to
Right.
get the returns back in dollars or like pounds or whatever your stable coin is. Right? So you're still going to
Yeah.
get access to the transaction fees. Just because they're not paid in Ocean doesn't mean they're valueless.
Good. Sure.
Yeah. And also one more reason why I feel even pricing the everything, like forcefully pricing everything in Ocean won't really have that value accrual effect, is because of, people will just buy Ocean and sell it immediately.
Yeah,
Like they won't be
that's
incentivized to
true.
hold it at all.
That's
exactly.
true.
Like, and now like I'll come to that in the tokenomics aspect, but they've, as with everyone else, tried to join the bandwagon and start a V token model. So it's just I think the tokenomics of this protocol are the ideas. I think the idea is brilliant. I think that the way they've constructed it is brilliant. I think that, like, as we'll see in a bit, the tokenomics leaves a lot to be desired, and so does the governance. And those are two aspects that are huge, and honestly, like, they could be done a lot better. These things just need to be simplified. But anyway, like, I think we can get to that in a bit. What I'll just like continue on with explaining how the AMM model works, right? And essentially like how Ocean works in full. So with the AMM model, right? So it's meant to allow for organic price discovery. LPs will stake Ocean by adding liquidity to a data token and Ocean pool, and they'll earn a cut of transaction fees from the pool in proportion to their stake. So similar to a regular AMM. And what's meant to be the case is that if you're staking a particular data set, it's a pointer towards the quality of that data set. Because if it's a high quality data set and it's used multiple times, that means the transaction fees that it garners are higher, right? And so that means the transaction fees that you get as a staker to that data set are higher. So it's meant to be an organic pointer towards the quality of a data set, which I think I actually agree with, because I think that makes sense. But the problem is that might not make sense at scale if you have millions of data sets, because it's very difficult to filter out for quality for individual stakers at that level of scale. So that's I think that's a point that definitely needs to be figured out. So now what I was alluding to is that the way that Ocean V4 actually works is that they try to solve the rug pull problem that previous iterations of the protocol faced. So like what used to happen was that because the publisher had access to all of the data tokens, they put in, let's say they put in 1,000 data tokens and 1,000 Ocean. And then like and a liquidity provider comes in and adds Ocean to that pool. Then the data token owner can then just rug pull the entire the tokens by like withdrawing the entire token liquidity, the data token liquidity from that pool, and they can get essentially what comes out with, if you look at the math, is that if you try to model out the math, is that the data token provider gets left with more Ocean than they initially put in, plus the same amount of data tokens, while the liquidity provider gets rug pulled and they get left with lesser Ocean than they actually provided. So I don't want to go over the math right now because that's just a long enough example, but essentially that's what used to be the case in Ocean V3, etc. Right? So now Ocean V4 has actually solved that, and I think they've done that pretty well actually. It means that the data publishers don't get their data tokens all at once. So the pool auto controls data token supply. So whenever someone stakes Ocean into a pool, the correct amount of data tokens are just minted according to the weights selected in that pool, right? So let's say that someone stakes 10 Ocean, and the weightage is like 90% data token, 10% Ocean. So someone stakes 10 Ocean, you get 90 data tokens for that. Right? So and the pool just controls the minting of the data token into that pool. So that's much better than the data publisher having the ability to just control the entire supply all at once. So I think that's a pretty innovative way of solving this issue, and they are also they're also allowing the data token price to be kept stable. So I think that they've done that pretty well. Then a couple of other things, right? So I'm just going to talk a little bit about like we've discussed, the fragility of Ocean's AMM model. But before that, let's just go through, what the Ocean market also has a purgatory process. So if there's IP violations and sensitive data that's been uploaded onto the platform by people who are not in control of that data, or who are not authorized to upload that data, the Ocean market purgatory process it points towards a process where there's a formal request for takedown that's submitted by an entity that claims that that sensitive data has been uploaded, or or data that's not owned by the publishers uploaded, they can formally request a takedown of that data. And the data asset then enters purgatory until the investigation is done. So it can't really be sold or anything like that in that time period. And then if it meets specific conditions, then it can revert back to default essentially. So it'll move out of purgatory. And these specific conditions can are instituted by ocean market. So I think that purgatory process is also a good idea. They've thought this through, because data violations, data privacy, sensitive data, all of that is huge, and you do need to account for it. Now it remains to be seen how scalable and effective this ocean market purgatory process actually ends up being. But the very fact that they've thought about the idea and implemented it to a certain level is a good sign. And now in terms of the AMM model, right? While Ocean's AMM model, it innovatively attempts to solve the pricing problem for data, and allows publishers to evade the question, and it's a very difficult question of how much is my data actually worth. In practical terms, it seems to be unfeasible, especially at scale. So, like I said, with millions of data sets, you need deep liquidity for all of them to accurately price the data tokens and not suffer from high slippage. Because if you don't have enough liquidity in the pool, and then you're trying to price all these data tokens individually for different data sets, then you're going to have huge slippage, because there's going to be a massively fragmented liquidity across the pools, because there's not going to be enough stakers, at least from what I think is feasible. There's not going to be enough stakers who are actually going to be able to stake in all pools. And you're essentially assuming that everyone in the world will own ocean tokens and then stake towards the quality of a data set to be able to assume that there'll be accurate and low slippage pools, with millions of different data sets. So this entire model of having one data set have its own pool is fundamentally flawed to me. So even though, price discovery for fixed pricing is not as authentic, right? As in an AMM model, it might be firstly more user friendly and intuitive to actually price your data in a fixed manner. And like a user doesn't, and just put yourself in the shoes of a data consumer. They don't care about, slippage, or like they just about, how they get access to their data. This is all stuff that Web3 people care about. The data consumer doesn't care about that. They just want access to their data. So it's much more intuitive for them to use a fixed price model where they can just access the data, right? So the AMM model fundamentally doesn't make as much sense to me. Now, what I think might be a better middle ground is to combine a bid auction model with a fixed price model to essentially have both good price discovery combined with ease of use for the customer. So what you could do is that for the first time a data set is introduced, you have a bid auction model that people bid for that data set. Now that price at which the highest bid wins remains the fixed price for X amount of time, let's say 3 months. And then after that, to update to reflect updated demand in the marketplace, for that data set, you can have a bid auction model for that data set every 3 months, or however much time the data publisher chooses for. So you can continuously update the fixed price of that data set. So what it does is it kind of balances between ease of use for the user and between wanting to get the price discovery of that data set correct. And I think that's a much more scalable model as well, and it's much easier to use for the customer. But it does bring up a question in that if the AMM model is not successful, how will the Ocean token generate fees, and how will the token accrue value? And that brings us back to the point which we were talking about earlier, which is the Ocean token doesn't necessarily have a use case here. It doesn't necessarily need to accrue value in this manner. If the end goal is to create a liquid data marketplace, then you don't need the Ocean token. It might actually be easier to do it without the Ocean token. But interested to hear your guys' thoughts on what I've just said here.
It seems like they're doing a lot of crypto things just for the sake of doing crypto things, and they haven't thought through the entire start to finish, what the token will do. And it seems like they're constantly changing their mind on how they want the token to accrue value. And it seems like they need the token to accrue value somehow for them to monetize it. according to
Exactly.
them. Because they probably, I mean, I don't know the tokenomics exactly and the distribution, but I'm guessing they are getting a significant percentage of the distribution of the ocean token, right? So
Actually, no,
the
which is
team,
the, I'll go over this
if
later if
not,
they're not. Yeah.
then I'm lost as to what their game plan is.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah,
just think that they're cryptofying this too much. I think that this is a word
yeah,
that needs to be created, by the way, cryptofying it. But like,
yeah,
I think that they're making this way too Web3 specific. It doesn't need to be. Like, just
Yeah.
simplify it, get it down to first principles. What do you want to do? You want to create a data marketplace. How do you do it best? You don't do it best by creating complexity for data consumers. You do
yeah,
it best by creating a tight UX that is just easy to use.
Yeah.
yeah.
I
I mean,
I
going
think what
from
they're
like,
doing is, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
so I was just gonna say that, AMMs and V tokenomics, it sounds great, but I don't see how it applies over here at all, right? Like, why
Yeah,
do you need it to be so complex when you're trying to do a very simple transaction? I mean, you're
exactly.
not trying to provide deep liquidity for stable coins, and there's no wars that are going to happen over your ocean
Yeah,
token if it doesn't make sense
exactly.
in the first place.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
I
yeah.
think I mean, just to try to put ourselves in their shoes, I think what they've done or what has happened is they've used, tokenization as as a method to bootstrap users, as all of all the protocols are doing. But by doing so, they've lost sight of what their actual product is, and have found themselves in the exact contradiction that we were pointing out right now. I think
Yeah,
that's
Yeah,
and I think that like actually they've used tokenization really well in terms of the data NFT and the data assets, so the data tokens,
yeah,
because I think that that's an amazing use of tokenization, right?
yeah,
You're trying to create a marketplace for assets that there is no marketplace for right now. You're allowing for copyright for data sets to be captured in NFTs, which is a fantastic idea, which is what NFTs should be used for. And you're creating these data tokens which have fine-grained access control permissions for that data set to be used in AI models. That is the crux of this application. That's what it should be
yeah,
geared towards. It shouldn't be geared towards pumping up the value of its own token. I mean, I don't want to be too harsher because I think that their core idea is fantastic. And I think that and we'll go into this in a second, but I think that the team also, the people behind this they have a lot of heft behind them, right? I'm a big fan of the idea itself. Just the execution in terms of the Web3fication of cryptofication of this it's just rubbed me up the wrong way a little bit.
yeah.
Um,
I think, founders and, investors need to have more faith in the protocol's ability to generate value in stable coins or, in currency that, users can just go and spend. They don't always need to rely on a token to, pump up the price, and then that's how they make their money by exiting that token. It can be a more gradual generation of value where, organically they keep earning money, and it keeps, as the network grows, more people will spend in stables and you will get a cut of those stables. It can be as simple as that. It doesn't need to
exactly,
be so complicated.
And
exactly.
what's ironic is, like a good way to distinguish between all those, complete Ponzi projects and actual projects is, if you just hypothetically assume that the project doesn't have a token, does it actually provide value? And most projects don't. If you remove the token, they have zero value add. This
Yeah,
Yeah,
project, ironically, if you remove the token,
yeah,
has a bunch of value add.
yeah,
So
yeah,
you know
exactly.
that it's a
Exactly.
project.
I want to go to Ocean and tell them, guys, like you could have the best product in like Web3, if you tried and like stop if you stop making it so Web3. And I don't want to say Web3 in a bad way because I love the space for all the faults that it has because of the promise that it has. But there's some stuff that we just need to strip away at. And
Yeah.
yeah,
this is one of them. But anyway, let's continue on.
I think
So
going over the
just yeah.
roadmap might be helpful.
Yeah, let's talk about like the just before like the roadmap, I'll just like quickly go through the main trend that's behind Ocean's emergence, and that's basically the growth of AI across every single industry across the world, right? Because a good AI models need good data, good clean data, and it's very difficult for them to obtain that. The big data market is growing exponentially. It's expected to be around $230 billion by 2025. And like AI is permeated through every aspect of our lives at this point. And essentially having quality varied data that allows for AI biases to be smoothed out while also training AI algorithms in a bunch of different ways. I mean, the use cases, the necessity for something like Ocean is pretty obvious to me, right? So that's essentially what the high level trend around the emergence of Ocean is. But in terms of their launch and use cases and all of that, right? And their future roadmap. Now, firstly, Ocean's network launch took place in Q1 2019. So its seed and pre-launch stages had 3,500 contributors from across 100 countries, which is quite a lot. Some key stats around their traction to data that their holders. So they've got about 34,500 holders, which is about 162% increase since September 2020. But this growth has been plateauing since September 2021. So the growth in the number of holders between September 20 and September 21 was 130%, while the growth between September 21 and today has been only 14%. This, I think, represents a little bit of two things: the broader crypto market downturn, but also just that Ocean's not been able to generate sticky network effects till to date, right? So the market cap's around $111 million. It's off 85% from its peak in November 2021. Again, in line with market conditions, same stuff. So this doesn't really reflect traction, but it's just like a market cap is just a useful indicator of the token of speculative action, not really actual traction in the protocol itself. The liquidity of the token is actually pretty high, so it's been listed on a number of exchanges, both centralized exchanges and DEXs. So Binance, Kraken, Bittrex, Uniswap, Balancer, Gate.io, quite a lot of different exchanges. In terms of that traction, right? Actually, Ocean's done pretty well on that aspect. So they're working with reputable companies across the board. So firstly, they worked with Certic to get 3 security audits done, which is actually a good sign. They also work with companies like PwC, KPMG, Holland and Knight, GSR, and Messari to comply with regulations across the board, which just engenders trust because they're being proactive in being achieving full compliance, which is good for which is good for consumers, right? And the use cases that they've actually implemented to date are pretty, legit. They've worked, they've done projects with entities like Connected Life, Next Billion, and the government of Singapore, right? And the different stakeholders in these projects include huge companies. So they're like Microsoft, Unilever, Aviva, Roche, Johnson & Johnson. So that's big. That's pretty big. The protocol is being used for something pretty useful, right? So what are some of the use cases that they've done? So Connected Life, firstly, it developed a data marketplace on Ocean protocol that enabled anonymized, non-personal data to be shared freely for open research, right? So essentially, what Connected Life did was it built a mobile app that transmitted INR results. So INR is the international normalized ratio. It's a measurement of how long it takes for blood to clot. So it obtains this data from this home monitoring device system developed by Roche. And what it does is let's say that I have to monitor my INR at home. I am in control of that data now, right? What it does is I send this data via Ocean protocol to hospitals, but Ocean protocol allows me to stay in control of my data as the patient. Right? So I can have full control over my data. I can securely transfer it. I get full provenance over how that data is being used in my home. So it's my own, data of like my own body and how long it takes blood to clot. They'll probably prick my body. They'll do some blood test at home using this blood monitoring test, and then they'll upload it to a server. Now the server that's uploaded to could be my Google Drive. I upload that data onto the Ocean market or Connected Life market, and and then hospitals that are the other data consumers who essentially are able to access this data to build out their models or just assess my blood work essentially, right? So I think that's a really good use case. Another one is Next Billion. So Next Billion is it's got access to large amounts of data about the cleanliness of public toilets in Thailand. So this data is used to train AI models to dispatch maintenance and cleaning personnel faster to clean toilets and like essentially avoid diseases and all of that. So the Next Billion is working with Ocean Protocol to create a data sharing marketplace where this data can be shared for free for public research, or it can be sold for market research purposes. So that's pretty useful. And another one, the last one is the government of Singapore's Info Communications Media Development Authority. It's a mouthful, but it's aiming to create a trusted data framework alongside Ocean Protocol and PwC. So they're building a standard to essentially govern data sharing between jurisdictions, which is a really useful thing because standards for data sharing are very fragmented and unclear today. And if Ocean is able to power a standard for data sharing, that's huge, right? And given that they're working with the government of Singapore, that's a pretty good sign as well of how reputable they are. Now their future roadmap, it seems like actually to me it's very ambitious and broad. They're saying things like, oh, where you're going to have data as an asset class for DeFi, where data assets are securitized, used as collateral in stablecoins and loans, the regular DeFi spiel. Or you can have composable data assets, so you can track, the top 100 data assets in an index, like through a single token, like similar for data assets as to what DeFi Pulse index is for the blue chip DeFi tokens, right? Now this future roadmap is well and good, but honestly, they just need to perfect their main product before delving into this. They need to perfect their core product. They need to attract users. They need to keep users, right? And that's what they should be focusing on. And now like if the roadmap sounds amazing, but it is a bit of a pipe dream at this point. And if they're allocating even one resource towards building out this future roadmap at this point in time, then that's a danger sign. They need to stop doing that because they need to just get their core product right. And that's essentially what their launch has been like, what the traction's been like to date. Any comments from you guys around that before I go into the team?
No, not really. I mean, it's great that they're doing all these things with different, big companies and also with the Singapore government, but I still don't think the core protocol, is perfectly designed. So do you think something that's inherently flawed according to us can actually scale to, let's say, like 1 billion users?
No,
And
definitely not.
Right. They definitely need to work on, before they continue with the roadmap, they need to think about the past and how they've got to where they are today and whether it actually makes the whole thing make sense. Because currently
anyway,
it seems
sorry, go on.
Do we know what the the companies you named, Unilever, Microsoft, Johnson Johnson? Do we know to what scope they are partnered with Ocean? Like, are they providing data? Are they using the marketplace? Like, do we know?
I mean, at least from in terms of Roche, like I think you will understand because that INR device is manufactured by Roche, so they must be working with Ocean to essentially grant consumers the access to their own data. Because what I'm assuming is that Roche would usually control that data, but it's not ethical for them to control patient data. So they might be working with Ocean Protocol to essentially allow patients access to that data from their device, transmitted to like a storage location of their choice, and then use Ocean Protocol to and the Connected Life marketplace built on top of it to transmit it to hospitals. But for the other ones, I'm not really sure, but I would assume that it's in one of those capacities that you mentioned, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
Got it.
anyway.
And also one thing I'll at least point out that didn't make much sense to me is out of the roadmap, it still does. It's not clear as to where Ocean tokens value is going to come from.
Yeah, it's not like it's a big that's one of the biggest things that needs
You
to
would
be sorted.
expect them to address it in the roadmap if it's not addressed right now, but it doesn't seem to be addressed in the roadmap.
Yeah, which is a danger sign again, because I don't know if they've realized this. right? But anyway,
Okay.
like I
And
think, yeah. Sorry, go on.
and I have another question with the, the healthcare data we're talking about the, the blood clots. So the, the providers of data are like, let's say, regular patients, and they provide data to Roche. And then Roche is the one creating a DAP, and
No,
then
no,
that
no, no,
DAP.
no, 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 no. So they are not the ones providing data to Roche. What they're doing is that they are obtaining their data from the Roche machine, because
Okay.
you can like the Roche machine. Let's say that it's got like a needle. You
Hardware.
put it in your arm. It takes the blood. It sees how it calculates how long your blood is clotting in. And then that data from the machine is transmitted to a storage location. It can be like, your Google Drive or whatever. It can be, Filecoin, whoever. I don't know how it's, the data
Yeah.
service. And from that data service, I am the, like, because I'm the patient, I can transmit, I have control over that data. I publish it on Ocean Marketplace, or on like the Connected Life Marketplace or whatever. It can be anonymized, it can be private, like it can, through that computer data or whatever. And then it's then transmitted to the hospital as a data consumer, or like, it can be transmitted for free for the hospital to essentially assess it. Depends on like how the model is of the Connected Life Marketplace. But the point of building the value added service is that you can have different types of marketplaces and different types of services with different requirements built into them, that allow for the data to be shared in a multitude of different ways.
Okay. Got it. That makes sense.
Cool. I'm just gonna move on because I don't want to. I think that we
Yeah.
should get through some of this stuff.
Yeah.
So Ocean Pro.
I think we can skip like just the hard facts if it's not, relevant to the any point. We
Yeah,
can
yeah,
mention
yeah.
that.
I'll just, yeah. I think one of the things that I'll go through is just very quickly around the team. So it's co-founded by Bruce Pond, who is a veteran in the blockchain space since 2013. They've created several blockchain applications all revolving around data. He's also, he was also a founder at this consulting company that aimed to build banks for the unbanked. Worked at Daimler for 5 years and Accenture for 6 years. Um, and the second co-founder is this gentleman, Trent McConaughey, extremely experienced within the AI space. Started his career by doing AI research for national defense in the 1990s. Created a Solido software that's used for most modern chip designs, which is pretty, it's a big thing. He's also advised the German, Dutch, Estonian, and other governments about their blockchain and AI strategies. They've got pretty legit advisors as well, including Ryan Selkis, who's the founder of Messari, and Meltem Demiroz, who's the chief strategy officer at CoinShares. I think that they've got a pretty good team behind them. Just one or two things is that, if you go on their team page on their website, the LinkedIn links are broken, which is, fine, whatever. It's not really a big thing. And it also seems like some key team members are all related, which I don't know. It always just brings up a bit of a red flag in my head. It might not really mean anything. And they might be very qualified for their jobs. So I don't really want to comment on that, but like just wanted to point it out, because it is in my head at least
By
a little bit of a red
related, you
flag.
mean their family?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, at least like the last names seem the same. So
Okay.
I don't know. It's just the point that I like to look at as well. It's yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, but all in all, it seems like the team is strong and experienced. Bruce Pond and Trent McConaughey have done quite a lot of work that's relevant in the past. And yeah, I think that I don't think that the team at least is a matter of huge concern, at least, right? Then I had a few thoughts from actually using this protocol. So initially, it wasn't really hard for me to use it, but that's also because I did a ton of research for this podcast and the article in order to be able to actually understand what Ocean Protocol is about. Everyone's not going to be able to do that. So they need to definitely simplify it, right? You don't want to go through a multitude of documents as a data publisher or consumer in order to be able to use the service. So that's not really, it needs to be simplified. Now, I have a key issue with the UX. So there's a lack of standardization. The data tokens have confusing names, so they're all named differently for no apparent reason. They need to be standardized to reduce misunderstanding. Also, stating the price of the data token in M-Ocean terms is also unnecessary. So I don't even know what M-Ocean really means, because why can't they just state it in Ocean? And actually, as to the point that we said, why can't they just state it in stables? But that's a separate point.
Yeah.
We've already discussed that. And yeah, like, a good feature is that when you click on the data set itself, the price converts into the currency if you're choosing. So I chose pounds, it converted into that. I thought that was a good thing, but also you'd have to click on the data set to be able to access that feature, and it should actually just be on the homepage. Yeah, a lot of work needs to go into improving the UI UX of the protocol. And as we've discussed, it faces the same problems that most crypto protocols face, in that they're built by Web3 native developers for Web3 native consumers. And in order to get true adoption, the billion people adoption that everyone speaks about, all these nuances need to be ironed out. And needs to be not they need to not know that they're using a blockchain product, essentially, right? But yeah, we've already discussed this. Now I'll go on to another diagram that I did that kind of explains the value accrual of the token. So we can go over that quickly. But essentially, right, on the Ocean network, there are a few different stakeholders. So firstly, the Ocean token is primarily used in the protocol as a means of value exchange, as a mechanism to incentivize keepers on the network. So keepers validate and verify services and store the history of transactions on the blockchain. But that doesn't really make sense. It's not like the role is not especially clear, because if Ocean's built on Ethereum, then why are there specific validators of the network? And do they just provide verification services for the quality of the data? So that needs to be ironed out. Not really sure what the keepers are, right? Now, the way that the value accrual of the token is that if the Ocean tools see increased usage, so if people build more services essentially on top of the Ocean protocol network, that means you get more network revenue. That network revenue goes in two directions. It goes towards 5% of it goes towards burning Ocean tokens, which reduces the Ocean token supply, which increases the value of the Ocean token. The second thing is that the network revenue is directed mostly towards Ocean DAO. Now, Ocean DAO, what it does is it gives grants to workers. So workers are people who build the value-added services on top of the Ocean data assets. Now, they build these Ocean tools, which increases the network revenue, and then you get the same cycle over and over again. Right? So that's essentially the way that Ocean is supposed to accrue value. The Ocean token is supposed to accrue value, and the network revenue is supposed to be generated. Right? So yeah, I'm going to stop sharing again. I think we'll share this in the article as well. But yeah, this is essentially how the Ocean token generates value, how it accrues value. Now, the second thing, like we alluded to earlier, is that Ocean's also introducing a V token, port escrow token model in Q3 2022. So this one was made popular, as with a lot of things in DeFi, by the curve walls. In this model, the users would lock up their Ocean tokens for a predetermined period when it's impossible to unlock their tokens, and the tokens vest linearly over this period. So in return for their liquidity, proportional to their lockup period, users receive V tokens. So these V tokens give them special governance tokens. So the longer the lockup period, the higher the governance power the V tokens have. And this applies to their rewards as well. They get higher boosts to their rewards the longer they lock up their tokens. So V Ocean holders what they'll do is that they can vote for Ocean DAO grants in this new model. And they also gain value from community fees. So 50% of transaction fees will go to V Ocean holders, and the rest will go to Ocean DAO grants, and like 5% of it will go through the burning of the Ocean token, etc. So to me, right, a V token model it can be a risky proposition. It's such a risky proposition in crypto when you don't know what's going to happen in a few months, let alone a few years. So locking up your liquidity for a few years is not a very attractive proposition, at least for a lot of people. So that like inherently reduces the set of people who are willing to govern your platform, right? And that, in my mind, actually reduces the decentralization of the platform. So crypto winters, we've seen it now. We're going through. I mean, it's not really I don't know if it's a winter. I don't want to comment on that, but it's in a bear market. It's been known to swallow the market caps of scores of non-blue chip and many times even blue chip protocols, right? Blue chip tokens. So if users don't have the ability to exit and the future of the protocol is in question, then their financial stake is at high risk. And therefore, if they want to exist and cannot due to the lockup period, there's a good chance that they become unmotivated and do not participate effectively in governance as well. So it'll have the opposite effect as to what was intended. So I don't think that the V token model is correct for this at all. And it just seems to me like a way in which they're trying to accrue value to that token, the same way that ApeCoin or someone or other tokens are, by essentially just trying to tell people, oh, just hold this token forever and don't ever sell it. That's where it'll accrue value. So it's just a whole game of like trying to like keep people holding on to their tokens, but without any real benefit. I mean, I don't really get why the V token model is a good model for this token for Ocean, but yeah, that's what they've implemented recently. I'll go over I'll go over the entire tokenomics, and then we can discuss discuss these things. But token in terms of the token release, Ocean Protocol raised $27 million over its initial seed and pre-launch rounds. And for the network launch, it exchanged 32 million tokens with early investors, seed and pre-launch investors at a price of 22 euro cents. I don't even know what euro cents per token. And released 191.7 million tokens in total. So that was only 13.6% of the supply cap of 1.41 billion tokens, right? So a significant proportion of tokens will be released as network rewards. So that's 51% of tokens are going to be released as network rewards. So it shows that and this network reward is intended to be programmatically released over 20 years. So because of these network rewards occupying such an important space, it's clear that the token is inflationary. But given that they are trying to burn 5% of all network rewards, and any remaining funding from Ocean DAO grants is also to be burned. So if there's any funding in a certain grant round that hasn't been used up, it gets burned. So they're trying to control inflation to a certain level. But it's very clear that it's a pretty inflationary token that just depends on network rewards to incentivize users. So token inflation, in terms of token inflation, the first year saw 104% of inflation, which makes sense because people are just receiving their allotments and the tokens are getting released. In 2022 to 2020 to 2022, saw inflation ranging between 17 to 21%. So the founding team got their remaining allocation and network rewards started to be dispersed. So inflation is intended to be reduced to 6.8% in 2024 and 5.9% in 2025, and then sequentially onwards, right? And the network reward is meant to be the only form of inflation after a certain point in time. So the initial high token inflation in the first few years aims to bootstrap usage of the protocol, right? But if incentives decrease and there isn't a high amount of usage on the platform by 2025, and the inflation decreases to materially, it'll have to find another way to get past this cold start problem of actually bootstrapping usage on this platform. And that idea is, to me at least, just to simplify it and make it just all about stablecoins and like ease of use, right? But yeah, that's they're going to have to get past this problem of of user stickiness. Now, in terms of the distribution and vesting schedule, the initial supply was set at 690.9 million. So there was a supply cap of 1.41 billion. And the tokens are intended to be distributed in the following manner. So 5% for the Ocean Protocol Foundation to build the community and ecosystem, so essentially to Ocean DAO. 20% for the team and founders. 24% for acquirers who are supporting development and token liquidity. So acquirers would essentially be the early contributors and investors and all of that. And 51% for Ocean rewards, right? Like I mentioned earlier. So the vesting periods are actually pretty good. The founders have a vesting period of 5 years from the project start. And seed contributors were locked in for 2.5 years. And pre-launch contributors were locked in for 1.5 years. So for the seed contributors, it was 1 year linear vesting after network launch in Q1 2019. And for pre-launch contributors, it was 6-month linear vesting after network launch. So that means all of their tokens have already been released onto the market. And the only tokens that are meant to be still released onto the market are the founder tokens, which should happen in Q1 2024. Now, Ocean DAO's initial treasury was also funded from 51% of the unminted token, Ocean, but some of which it converted into ETH, DAI, and other tokens by selling Ocean bonds. And the treasury is meant to accrue value from network rewards and active treasury management. So the funds from the treasury are spent on network rewards and grants. Now, in terms of the treasury allocation, it's not very clear. So documentation says that the treasury is allocated from the 51% of unminted token Ocean, but it's not very clear why, because they get like 5% of the initial rewards of the initial allocation as well. And it's not clear how much ETH, DAI, or other tokens they raised by selling, Ocean bonds. So yeah, it's not really clear, how much the treasury has. And comparing it to the optimal token distribution, where so in the optimal token distribution, according to Cooper Turley and Lawrence Stefanian, we've alluded to this earlier. The team and investors get 17.5% each. The treasury gets 50%. Airdrops account for 5%, and ecosystem incentives are 10%. So for Ocean, it's immediately apparent that ecosystem incentives are disproportionately high. So it shows that the project relies significantly on token inflation, especially in the early stages. But Ocean has released only 13.6% of its tokens at network launch, right? So this does leave them a lot of room for network rewards to be distributed over the coming years without, going past that token supply cap. But that's essentially how the Ocean tokenomics works, right? So I think I'll just stop here, and then we can discuss, the tokenomics for a little bit.
Yeah, it seems like the token distribution and the supply schedule, it's decent, but it's decent. It's a decent schedule for like a completely shit coin, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I feel bad for the amount of effort in a way that they've put into this whole release schedule, and then it's like the actual Ocean token doesn't really have any real use case, right? That
Yeah.
ETH or DAI couldn't do. So
Yeah,
I mean, it just
exactly.
seems like it's like a way for them to bootstrap liquidity in like the old liquidity mining kind of way, which so many Ponzi protocols also did. So I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Sit, you're on mute.
I have a question. So what if, and I'm trying to think of ways to add use cases to the Ocean token. What if you need to lock up Ocean for a duration which is, which we can see whatever works best if this concept works. But what if you need to lock up Ocean to earn the right to buy a data set? So and the intent behind it,
Complicated.
the intent behind it is to say that as long as there's demand for the data set, there will be Ocean token locked up. Hence, of course, it's a forceful utility of the token, but it ends up accruing some sort of value over what's happening right now.
I don't think that makes sense, because you're just going to create UI UX problems for consumers. I mean, you're just going
Yeah.
to make it more difficult for them to buy data sets. Why? Like, what is like? Let's just, I mean, stop. Like in the sense that, like, yeah, I know what you're trying to do, and like it's a good thing. We're trying to actually drive use cases for this, for like value to this token, but it doesn't make sense, because you're just creating, by adding value to the token, you're adding friction to the process, and then you're like diluting from the main goal, which is a liquid data economy. It
Yeah,
doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
But I
mean,
think
I
we've
think,
actually, yeah.
everything in crypto is being defied in a way. I mean, I think different crypto sectors in that use crypto should have their own specific kind of models. If you use DeFi models for things outside of DeFi, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I think that we've actually gone through the tokenomic aspect of this pretty
also just
comprehensively earlier as well.
one more question, not on the tokenomics really, but on how investors could earn value in in such a project. Wouldn't a better way just be investing in equity for the
Yeah, I
people?
mean, that's what I
Yeah.
think so as well. Like, you could just invest in equity and get returns the regular way. I mean, like, honestly, like at some point we have to realize that the earlier way of doing things is not all wrong. Like investing in equity is not a wrong thing, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, like you want the DAO to have like all this governance stuff and voting for the token, voting for it and all. Like, I mean, sure. In terms of the grants, I think that the Ocean token voting for the grants, like fair enough. But I'm sure that there could be another way of doing that. Right? I mean, like not gone too much into the not thought about it in too much depth, but I'm sure that if we sat down and with our heads together, we could figure out a way of getting these DAO members to vote on to vote on grant allocation in a different manner as to using Ocean tokens. But yeah, anyway, I'm conscious of time, so like I just want to we've discussed the tokenomics in quite a lot of depth. So I think let me just go over the governance aspect of it and just the performance of the token over the last few months very quickly, and then just we can just go through some suggestions and final thoughts. But essentially, in terms of governance, Ocean Protocol is supported by Ocean DAO. So what Ocean DAO, the main goal of it is to direct resources towards funding grants that create these value-added services on top of the Ocean Protocol. Their governance model is not very well thought out. It's just a one token, one vote model where Ocean holders vote on snapshot for the most promising projects to fund from the grants and treasury. If there aren't enough value-added projects available to fund, then the remaining Ocean from the funds gets burned. A flaw is that um, you know one wallet address can only vote on one proposal, meaning that if an Ocean holder wants to vote on multiple proposals, they need to fund multiple wallet addresses, which really, I mean, it's an obvious UI UX design flaw. And it may disincentivize voting on proposals. So accurate voting on proposals. So, that doesn't really make sense to me. Why can't they just use one wallet and allocate their Ocean to how many other grants that they want to? That's just like the most obvious thing that can be done, right? But yeah, that doesn't make sense to me. The one token, one vote model also has several flaws. Because the Ocean tokens are transferable, votes can be bought by whales who can then take control of the voting for the grants. It can also limit scalability since high community participation is required to pass proposals. A lot of energy and time and energy is spent on campaigning for the proposals. And it also becomes extremely time consuming for the average community holder members to vote on every proposal to meet quorum. So it just like doesn't seem really scalable. And in terms of the V token model, where um, holders of V tokens vote on the grants, it may also bias voting towards whales who can afford to lock up liquidity for years on end, right? So the governance model has really not been thought out through well. It's not very well developed. It seems rudimentary, and definitely these are areas for improvement. Um, in terms of performance, right? So, I mean, broader market outturn, the price has dropped by 83% since the high in November 2021. But the most concerning thing for me, and the pointer that the protocol actually needs to revamp the way that it's doing things in a number of ways, is that the weekly active users have also decreased in terms of old and new users using the protocol as well. So there's since highs, I think it looks like it was in early 2021 when new users joined the protocol. The number of new users joining has actually like it seems like it's plateaued, which is very concerning, right? Because the usage of data sets and AI models really shouldn't depend on market conditions, right? And therefore, using the Ocean token for payment and all over the Ocean ecosystem may actually be detrimental compared to using stable coins for payment and transaction, as we've been talking about all of this episode. Um, and the reduction in weekly active users just suggests that user stickiness or network effects have not been achieved to any sort of level yet, right? So that's a pretty negative sign for me. And another, so that I think that's essentially around the performance. And just before we go on to closing thoughts and just discuss the governance and the performance, just wanted to highlight some gaps in our analysis, because we've tried to gather as much data as possible to ensure complete holistic analysis. There are a few gaps. So we haven't been able to source any metrics from token terminal since Ocean protocol is not on token terminal. So we haven't been able to get the protocol revenue and token incentives distributed, which would have been immensely helpful in comprehensively understanding the success of that token incentive program to date, and understanding its stickiness as a protocol. But that's why we use the weekly active users metric as a proxy for this. Secondly, we haven't been able to find the total amount staked and any changes in this number, so that would also indicate the performance and traction. And the composition of his treasury is not readily available, which is a bit annoying, because it would be useful to understand the effectiveness of their treasury management, and in terms of transparency as to how many ocean bonds they've sold, how much ETH and DAI they've made, understanding how the treasury actually looks like at this point. So that would have been pretty useful. But yeah, I think that's essentially it for me. I think I'm just going to go through some suggestions and closing thoughts, but let's first, if you guys have any questions about what we've discussed after the tokenomics.
No, not really. I think we can just start with the closing thoughts, and I'm gonna just, start with the first one. So first, I guess the UI and UX really needs to improve. It needs to, it needs to be easy for people to just go and buy and sell data, and it shouldn't be unnecessarily, complicated in the typical crypto way that it is, because it doesn't need to be, right? It's not a DeFi application where you need to do lots of staking, unstaking, and different transferring money from one ecosystem to another. It should be very straightforward to just go and get your data and get out with it. It shouldn't be this long process, so they need to really cut down on that. And then secondly, I guess the AMM model also doesn't make that much sense. It should just be a standard kind of fixed rate, and you can sell and buy data for that fixed rate no matter what the market conditions are, no matter how liquid it is, right? Because it shouldn't be that you need to time when you need to buy your data or something stupid like that. It should be equally accessible at all points of time. And then lastly, I guess the tokenomics themselves don't make any sense, because the Ocean token, as we discussed earlier, has no real use case other than the fact that you can use it to buy your data along with other things, which is, that makes no sense.
Yeah. So I think that you touched upon basically all the points that I wanted to touch upon for my closing thoughts.
Oh, great.
So I think
Okay.
but that's just good analysis from you as well, I guess. But yeah, honestly, my closing point is essentially that I think that the idea is absolutely fantastic. I think that it's something that needs to be implemented. I just think that the execution hasn't been there, and it's too cryptofied. And like you said, we just need to pare down to the very basics of creating a liquid data economy and just start from scratch there, right? Like, not even start from scratch, like the basic, the core principles of this are there. Like the idea to create value added services on top of data assets that represent copyright and access and fine grained access permissions is a fantastic skeleton on which to create. It's not even skeleton, it's literally like the core, right? So I think that the core idea, the core purpose of the protocol, and the way that it can be constructed is great. I think that there just needs to be a tendency towards simplicity that needs to be implemented. But overall, I think the idea is great, right? But yeah, that's my final word in this.
What if
I agree.
What if you need Ocean, to lock up Ocean to be able to build third-party value-added services?
Dude,
What about
yeah, I think at this point we're just reaching though, right? Yeah, like sure, you need to lock up that, but why? Like why can't you just make it as easy as possible for them to just build it?
Yeah,
Like why? Let's
I
just get
agree with
back to
that.
first principles. Like why do we need to do these things just to accrue value to a
Yeah,
token?
I think
All tokens don't need to exist.
right. No, I think Ocean as a whole, if you zoom out, is part of that whole the next suite of protocols which are providing real life utility, which is amazing. Like
Yeah.
Orchid, Hive Mapper, all those guys, which is like almost it was pretty much at the cutting edge of this space. But with being at the cutting edge is you have to figure out these problems, like do you really need to tokenize everything, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's what the main crux of the flaw with this being a valid investment would be.
Yeah, I
Um,
wouldn't.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, like we're not providing investment advice or anything here. I mean, you guys decide by yourselves whether you want to invest in these things. But
But I think it's
you know,
pretty obvious where three of us stand on this
Yeah.
token
yeah,
as an investment.
exactly. Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
But yeah, no, I think that's it then. And we've gone for pretty long, gone on for pretty long today. But I think it's been a pretty comprehensive analysis. So thanks, guys. Really good questions as well. And it's been a lot of fun to like analyze this protocol and actually find out a lot about a very very innovative idea. So it's been
Yeah.
a lot of fun. And thanks for joining us. And see you guys next time. Cheers.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.